Gustav Stresemann was born in Berlin on the 10th of May 1878 into a lower middle class family. He enjoyed a comfortable upbringing and he was raised in a well-off area, the Köpenicker Straße to be more precise, in a house which also served as a bar. When little Gustav proved to be remarkably intelligent, his parents enabled him to visit a gymnasium, which is a secondary school in Germany that prepares you for university, similar in concept to a grammar school in the UK. Even before he finished school, he had developed a strong interest in politics. He approached the left-liberal weekly newspaper, Dresdner Volkszeitung, lied to the editor about his age, and eventually managed to write a number of articles. In them he mostly targeted the Prussian conservatives, the Protestant Church, the unjust three-class voting system that was in place in Prussia, and he criticized the growth of anti-Semitic as well as anti-liberal thought in various layers of German society. Even though he was personally mostly interested in history and literature, and played with the thought of becoming a journalist, in 1898 he enrolled into the University of Berlin and studied national economics. Later he switched to the University of Leipzig and got his doctorate in 1901 after writing a thesis on the bottled beer industry in Berlin, supervised by the prominent economist Karl Bücher. After finishing uni, he became an assistant at the Association of Chocolate Manufacturers in Dresden, where Stresemann showed great organizational talent. Later he became the syndic of the newly founded Association of Saxon Industrialists, a position he held until 1919. Under his leadership, the Association of Saxon Industrialists became one of the biggest local business associations in all of Germany. In October 1903, Stresemann got married to Käthe Kleefeld, the daughter of a wealthy manufacturer from Berlin, and the wedding ceremony took place at the Kaiser Wilhelm Gedächtniskirche. The Kleefeld family were of Jewish background, but like many other Jews in Germany at the time, converted to Protestantism. Gustav and Käthe proved to be a very happy and successful couple, and would later have 2 sons. Alongside making a name for himself in the world of German industry, Stresemann also became active in politics. Initially, he became a member of the National Social Association, a liberal party under the leadership of the parish pastor Friedrich Naumann. The party was mostly popular among intellectuals and sought to combine liberalism with nationalism in order to create a more democratic Germany and to bridge the gap between the bourgeoisie and the working class. When the National Social Association got dissolved after an abysmal election result in 1903, Stresemann joined the National Liberal Party instead. The National Liberal Party mostly served the interests of the German industry and banking sector and followed a nationalistic as well as a liberal course. The party was one of the main supporters of the German endeavours to build up a colonial empire, argued for the expansion of the army and the navy, and held close contacts to nationalist organisations such as the Pan-German League and the Navy League. After joining the party, Stresemann enjoyed a great degree of political success. In 1907, he was elected to the German parliament as a representative of the constituency of Annaberg. After his victory, he was the youngest member of parliament and was quickly recognized for his skilled rhetorics. Stresemann's success wasn't very long-lived, however, as he lost his seat following the election of 1912, after which he got ousted from the executive committee by the party's right wing. 2 years later, he would become a member of parliament once more, and this time for the East Frisian constituency of Wittmund-Aurich as a result of a by-election. He quickly rose up the party ranks, and in 1907, following the death of chairman Ernst Bassermann, he became the vice-chairman of the National Liberal Party. At that time, Stresemann's political views were not exactly groundbreaking or revolutionary. He still held on to the liberal ideas from his teenage years and denounced the intolerance as well as the discrimination in German society. But he was also extremely pragmatic and attempted to find some common ground with the Social Democratic and Conservative parties. And, like most of his party colleagues, he was a convinced imperialist and nationalist. For instance, he contradicted himself in his justified criticism of societal injustices by fully supporting the Germanization measures that were going on at the time in Prussia's Polish-speaking areas. He also argued for an expansionist policy, stating that Germany needed a bigger colonial empire if it wanted to compete with the other European powers, and he made no secret of the fact that he was willing to go to war over it. His imperialist worldview would also carry into the First World War. Shortly after the war broke out, Stresemann became one of the most relentless advocates for German annexations at the cost of its enemies. In October 1914, he had been elected as a member of the so-called Committee for War Compensations, a subcommittee of the War Committee of German Industry, which had been formed by the Central Association of German Industrialists and the Association of Industrialists. His task was to draw up plans for a German-dominated post-war Europe. By the end of the year, the committee had largely formulated its ideas, and on the 8th of December 1914, Stresemann presented the results to the Chancellor, Theobald von Bethmann-Hollweg. In Europe, Stresemann wanted to annex the coal-rich areas of northern France and the Brie Basin, famous for its steel production. Belgium should be partitioned into 3 parts, with Liège becoming a part of Prussia, Antwerp becoming a free city in the German Empire, and the rest of the country being turned into a colony without representation in the parliament. Further, he demanded the Baltic regions of the Russian Empire, as well as a Polish border strip reaching from Piotrków to Vilnius. Central Europe should be transformed into a German-dominated customs union, which should secure export markets for German products and constant access to valuable resources. And in Africa, Germany's colonial empire should be expanded to include the Congo and Dahomey. These demands were obviously outlandish and never became official German state policy. In the nationalistic fervour that emerged shortly after the outbreak of World War I, Stresemann seems to have thrown all of his former pragmatism and sense of reason out of the window. Bethmann-Hollweg remained vague on his promises to Stresemann and the War Committee of German Industry, as he didn't want to annex even more angry national minorities into the country. Stresemann's views on these annexations don't just reflect on his nationalistic and imperialist attitudes, but also on his views as an industrialist. In light of a future trade war with Britain, Germany needed to secure its maritime and economic position in Europe at all cost. He kept stressing the need to achieve favourable trade conditions for Germany in its export markets in Austria-Hungary, the Balkans and in the Ottoman Empire, and argued for the construction of German military bases. In Stresemann's eyes, Britain was the main adversary, and World War I was nothing but the pinnacle of the commercial rivalry between the two countries that had been brewing in the early 20th century. A mere trade war, so to speak. He called for the complete mobilization of the country to secure Germany's spot at the top and to finally destroy British dominance over world trade. This was the main reason why he pleaded for unrestricted U-boat warfare, and years after the end of the war he was still convinced that Germany could have won World War I had it only used its U-boats more aggressively. Pretty much until the bitter end, he completely refused to accept the possibility of a negotiated white peace without annexations or reparations from either side. For him, the war could only end with a total German victory or with the destruction of the German nation. He held on to this view until summer 1918, when he finally realized, alongside most other Germans who had been lied to by the army command for years, that Germany could not win this war. At first, Stresemann kept a cool head and hoped that he and his party might become part of the new government that would enter peace talks with the Allies. He approached the so-called Inter-Party Committee, an unofficial body formed in 1917 consisting of members from the majority parties in the Reichstag, so the Social Democrats, the Centre Party and the Progressive People's Party, to discuss the matter. In the previous year, the Inter-Party Committee had met to discuss the question of peace and sought to increase the cooperation between the parties, but now, in 1918, it had one sole goal in mind: the immediate end of the war and the transformation into a fully democratic parliamentary republic. With this in mind, it makes sense why the Inter-Party Committee ultimately refused to work with Stresemann and his party, as bringing a notorious annexationist and warmonger into their ranks wouldn't increase their chances of getting a fairer peace deal. The full blow against Stresemann's political career came in October, when the High Command insisted on an immediate armistice and when the new Chancellor, Max von Baden, refused to take the National Liberals into his government. After he had finally recovered from his shock, Stresemann saw an opportunity to reform the German political landscape. Together with the right wing of the National Liberal Party and some members of the Progressive People's Party, he founded the German People's Party and would remain its head until his death. In many ways, the German People's Party was your typical liberal party, but with a generous sprinkle of nationalism and revanchism. It supported the complete equality of the sexes, stressed the importance of freedom of religion, opposed the nationalization of the industry, supported the industrialists, and opposed state intervention into the economy. But it also opposed the new democracy and demanded the return to the old imperial system, demanded the return of the black, white and red flag, rejected the Treaty of Versailles, and demanded the unification of Germany with Austria. Personally, Stresemann remained a monarchist at heart, and the idea of being ruled by a Kaiser symbolized to him the greatness of a unified Germany. But still, he possessed a personality trait that many monarchists and nationalists at that time lacked: pragmatism. He realized that the flight of Kaiser Wilhelm II and the proclamation of the Republic constituted a fait accompli, and that bringing back the monarchy would only result in unnecessary bloodshed. Instead of clinging on to blind and fruitless opposition to the Republic, the party should do its best to pursue its interests within a democratic framework. In a letter in January 1919 to one of his friends who was worried about the party's proclamation in favor of democracy, Stresemann wrote, "I have stressed that I was, am and will remain a monarchist. On the other hand, the question of whether it is currently possible to restore the monarchy is completely different. If it were only possible through civil war, we would have to give it up in the interests of our country, so that it would not be torn apart any longer. The Reich comes first, the monarchy only afterwards." He also had to overcome his own personal feelings when the peace conditions of the Treaty of Versailles became known to the public. Initially, Stresemann was outraged by them and demanded that the treaty shouldn't be signed. But then he once again fell back into his worldview as an economist and argued that economic reasons might convince the Allies to revise the peace conditions a little. In his eyes, the Allies have got to realize that the world economy cannot possibly recover without a prosperous Germany, and that it was in their interests to lower the German war reparations. He also hoped that the consolidation of power of the Bolsheviks in Russia might motivate the Allies to further approach Germany. Slowly he began to see the Treaty of Versailles as an opportunity. Politically, Stresemann also harbored hope for success. The German People's Party should slowly increase their electorate by appealing to nationalist sentiments, and by presenting the party as the reasonable middle ground between the Social Democrats and the anti-Semitic and populist German National People's Party. And indeed, in the first Reichstag elections of 1920, the German People's Party managed to get 13.9% of the vote, and thus gained 62 seats in the parliament, which was a very decent result. By 1922, Stresemann had turned from a staunch anti-republican into a Vernunftrepublikaner, or a Republican of reason in English. This term is often used to describe Weimar politicians who held no sympathy for the democratic system, but still supported it either for a lack of any viable alternative or out of a sense of duty for the German nation. It was a long and difficult road that Stresemann walked to become a Vernunftrepublikaner, but one event that was certainly crucial in shaping his views was the assassination of Walter Rathenau by members of the right-wing extremist and anti-Semitic organization Consul in June 1922. Stresemann was a big admirer of Rathenau and saw the dangers that political assassinations brought with them, especially in unstable times like these. As such, he was willing to cooperate with the other Republican parties to pass a new law to protect the Republic from terrorism. In a rousing speech, Stresemann argued for closer cooperation between the parties, regardless of personal convictions. He declared that Germany could never find peace so long as it tore itself apart in conflicts about the past. He also appealed to far-right politicians to see reason and to stop blaming the Republican system for all the misery. In the end, the law passed, but the members of the German People's Party were split on whether they wanted to support Stresemann's new course, as only half of them voted in favor of the new law. In August of 1923, Stresemann became the new German Chancellor at the request of President Friedrich Ebert, a position which he held only for a few months, with a short interruption in October. He enjoyed not only the support of his party, but also of the Social Democrats, the Centre Party and the German Democratic Party. But he was not to be envied, as he took control in what can possibly be the most turbulent and chaotic year in Weimar history, as the country faced three different massive challenges. First, there was the French occupation of the Ruhr area. Following the German inability to pay its reparations fully, French and Belgian troops marched into the Ruhr area in January. The French president, Raymond Poincaré, hoped to put further pressure on Germany and to exploit the industry in the area. In response, the German government urged the local population to offer passive resistance and to not work for the occupying forces. This might have been a good idea on a geopolitical level, but it completely ruined the country. At the height of the crisis, Germany had to pay benefits for 2 million unemployed workers, and of course it suffered from a lack of revenue from the profitable Ruhr area. Furthermore, over 100 people died and many more were expelled by the occupying forces. In September 1923, Stresemann proclaimed the end of passive resistance, and in November, the Ruhr industrialists began to deliver coal to France. The second problem was hyperinflation. Due to a vast number of factors that in some cases went back to the First World War, the mark constantly lost value, and in November of 1923, $1 had the same value as 4.2 trillion marks. This was of course a traumatic experience, as savings were swept away, as a result of which millions lost their faith in the economy and the democratic system. Only after the monetary reforms of Finance Minister Hans Luther and the Currency Commissioner Hjalmar Schacht, which saw the introduction of a new currency order, did the situation improve. Slowly the economy recovered and the prices sank again. The third big problem was internal instability and conflicts between the central government in Berlin and the various states. Saxony and Thuringia, for example, were ruled by a coalition consisting of Social Democrats and the German Communist Party. Immediately, Stresemann demanded the resignation of Saxony's communist ministers, which they refused. And so, with the support of President Ebert, the Saxon government was deposed after the army marched in. Something similar happened in Thuringia. Another conflict erupted with Bavaria, when the Bavarian Commissioner General, Gustav von Kahr, ignored an order from the army to ban the National Socialist newspaper, Der Völkische Beobachter. At that time, Bavaria was a hotspot for reactionaries and right-wing extremists, and the local government saw itself as a bulwark against the apparent Marxist chaos that was supposedly prevalent in other parts of Germany. In a public appeal, Kahr wrote, "Bavaria sees it as its duty to be a stronghold of the oppressed Germans in this hour. In agreement with the Commissioner General, the Bavarian government has therefore entrusted Lieutenant General von Lossow with the leadership of the Bavarian part of the Reichswehr." There were rumors flying around that von Kahr was going to march on Berlin, and the refusal to obey direct orders was certainly treason, which called for army intervention like in Thuringia and Saxony. But after considering his options, Bavaria was the second largest state after all, and not wanting to risk a civil war, Stresemann sought a compromise and requested the Bavarian government to transfer control over the troop station in Bavaria back to the army. The Social Democrats were outraged. They said that Chancellor Stresemann took a strict course of action against the anti-democratic left in Saxony and Thuringia, but chose a more relaxed approach when dealing with right-wingers in Bavaria. As a result, they left the coalition and Stresemann was forced to resign on the 23rd of October 1923. Partially due to Stresemann's realism and smart thinking, the Weimar Republic survived the crisis of 1923. Under the new cabinet, led by Wilhelm Marx from the Centre Party, Stresemann served as the foreign minister, a position he would hold until his death and from where he achieved his greatest successes. Stresemann was a firm believer in the idea of the primacy of economy, a worldview which emphasizes the predominance of the economy over all other aspects in political decision-making. In order to bring Germany back onto the world stage without an armed conflict, Stresemann wanted to use Germany's economic potential for diplomatic purposes. In a speech in 1926 in front of an industrial lobby group in Düsseldorf, he explained his worldview. "I have never doubted that power is the first thing that determines the history of nations, and will continue to do so for all eternity. We do not have that power, so we must refrain from it. The strength of the economy is the only thing in which we are still great. With it we can show kindness to other countries or act hostile against them." Stresemann put most of his hopes in the United States, which should invest into the German economy and stimulate its growth, while simultaneously becoming an important political partner. With their support, the question of the German war reparations would finally be settled. At that time, the question of war reparations was the source of heated discussions within the German political sphere, and there were genuine concerns that the economy could crack under the pressure. In August of 1924, Stresemann managed to negotiate an agreement with the Western powers to finally settle the matter of reparations in a fairer way. The Dawes Plan, named after the American banker Charles Dawes, was Stresemann's first major geopolitical success. Dawes realized that Germany could only pay its reparations if it was given a chance to recover its economy. The plan saw the end of the Ruhr occupation, forbade any similar incursions in the future, and granted Germany a loan of 800 million marks. In exchange, Germany should pay 2.5 billion gold marks annually after a spare period of 5 years. The national railway and bank were put under international control, and the German industry had to bear a mortgage of 5 billion gold marks. In the short term, the Dawes Plan was hugely beneficial for the German economy. Between 1924 and 1931, the amount of foreign credits flowing into Germany was higher than the amount of reparations paid. The economy recovered quickly, and the 5 years following 1924 are considered to be the most stable and prosperous in Weimar history. The big downside of this was that the German economy became too dependent on foreign loans. All of these short-term American credits, which were usually used on long-term investments, would prove fatal after the economy crashed in 1929, when they were suddenly withdrawn. In 1924, however, nobody saw that coming, and Stresemann was celebrated for ending the Ruhr occupation and for laying the groundwork for a slow economic boom. At the same time, however, the international situation once again seemed to be changing to Germany's disadvantage. According to the Treaty of Versailles, the bridgehead surrounding Cologne, which had been occupied by Allied forces, should be evacuated after 5 years, provided that Germany manages to fulfill its obligations. The evacuation date was supposed to be the 10th of January 1925, but the Allies delayed it indefinitely due to Germany's failure to comply with the disarmament clauses of the treaty. Furthermore, the new British Foreign Minister, Austen Chamberlain, was prepared to offer France a mutual defensive pact. Stresemann was worried about these developments, as those decisions were made without German participation. He feared that Germany would not be accepted as an equal member of the European community, but instead an object for the Allies to dictate over. And so he decided to take the initiative. After some encouragement from the British ambassador in Berlin, Lord D'Abernon, who was himself against the proposed Anglo-French Defensive Pact, Germany sent out a secret memorandum to the British and French governments. It suggested a pact expressly guaranteeing the present territorial status on the Rhine, which was tantamount to a renunciation of all German claims on Alsace-Lorraine, proposed a guarantee on all states along the Rhine not to go to war with each other under the trusteeship of the US, and expressed Germany's desire for a peaceful future. After some pressure from Britain and the US, France agreed to accept the German offer, and the road to the Conference of Locarno was paved. In October 1925, representatives from Germany, France, Italy, Britain, Belgium, Poland and Czechoslovakia met in the Swiss city of Locarno to discuss the ideas of Germany's memorandum. And of course, Stresemann was present as well. At the end of those genuinely friendly discussions, some crucial agreements were made. Firstly, Germany, France and Belgium agreed to keep the current borders as they were and to resolve any potential future border conflict peacefully. Britain and Italy were supposed to make sure that this agreement was kept. Secondly, Germany should finally be allowed to enter the League of Nations as an equal member, which should guarantee a new world order based on cooperation and stability. And thirdly, even though Germany still refused to recognize its new eastern borders, it and Poland agreed to resolve any regional conflicts that might arise peacefully. Similar arbitration agreements were signed with all the other present countries. The treaties were a diplomatic milestone, and Stresemann was celebrated for his foresight and reason. Many hoped that the spirit of Locarno might finally have triumphed over the narrow-minded and self-centered diplomacy that had been prevalent in the first 2 decades of the 20th century. There is very little doubt that Stresemann's intentions to achieve better relations with the Western powers were genuine and not just a ploy to buy Germany more time to rearm and then take its revenge or something like that. His days as a revengeful imperialist were behind him, and he was enough of a realist to see that Germany's security interests could be achieved best by partnering up with the Allies. Even though he was never a genuine pacifist at heart, he still knew that even a small-scale conflict with Poland, for instance, could destroy all the progress he had made since 1923. He put it best in a lecture in front of a group of students in Heidelberg in 1928. The preservation of peace and the attempts to achieve it are not timidity. are not weakness, they are the real political recognition of our own national interest. To our modern eyes, such an agreement seems to have been the only reasonable way to go forward and should probably have been reached much earlier, but at that time the question of the future border between Germany and France was a highly contentious matter. Germany would have to give up Alsace-Lorraine, while France would have to give up its hopes of a border running along the River Rhine. The Locarno treaties were incredibly controversial in Germany, and especially the nationalists and monarchists were upset about Stresemann giving up Alsace-Lorraine. Shortly after Stresemann's return, the far-right German National People's Party decided to reject the treaties and left the current ruling coalition. Now Stresemann had to convince the German public and the politicians in the Reichstag of his approach. He held numerous speeches in which he explained how his new course was beneficial for everybody, why warm relations with the Allies were absolutely essential, and how he would guarantee peace in Europe. The Allies also brought forth convincing arguments by promising to finally evacuate the area around Cologne and to reduce the number of occupying armies in the Rhineland. In the end, the treaties were approved by the Parliament, and on the 1st of December 1925, Stresemann travelled to London for the final signing ceremony. Just like the Locarno treaties had demanded, Germany joined the League of Nations in autumn of 1926. Stresemann had promised the German public that this step would allow Germany to defend its interests in front of an international forum and grant the country more influence. Slowly, the Treaty of Versailles could be revised even further, but instead of fully using the possibilities of the League of Nations to their fullest, Stresemann preferred to passionately argue his cases in private conversations with other statesmen. He was willing to make concessions and to consider the interests of the other countries, while still not losing sight of his final goal of returning Germany to great power status. During several meetings in Geneva, Stresemann became a close friend of Aristide Briand, the French foreign minister. Briand wanted France to turn away from its punishing and suppressive policies against Germany and to instead follow a policy of strict kindness. As long as Stresemann's ideas did not disturb French interests, he was willing to accept them. For their combined efforts in normalizing the relations between Germany and France and in preventing a future war, both Stresemann and Briand were awarded with the Nobel Peace Prize in December 1926. Stresemann had promised the German public a lot before the country joined the League of Nations, and if he wanted to keep his position as foreign minister, he had to deliver results. But that wasn't so easy. His strategy required him to be flexible, get his priorities in order, and be willing to compromise. He found himself under a lot of criticism from various sides who accused him of sloppiness and of not representing Germany's interests with enough determination. Stresemann worked hard to combat these criticisms by gathering support among interest groups and politicians. He organized countless press conferences, wrote commentaries in various newspapers, and held gripping speeches. Some years after joining the League of Nations, Stresemann could show the country what he had achieved. He succeeded in making French troops withdraw from the Saar area and convinced the League of Nations to appoint an Englishman as the head of the Saar's governing commission. Furthermore, he prevented the looming permanent League control of German disarmament. As such, he never got tired of stressing how the Allies' loyal spirit of accommodation would slowly but surely benefit Germany. And it worked. As long as the standard of living in the country was rising and the Weimar Republic enjoyed a period of relative stability, Stresemann never attracted any serious controversies. Even the German National People's Party, who had broken up the government coalition in 1925 out of protest over the Locarno treaties, realized the benefits of Germany joining the League, and Stresemann's strategy of warming up to the Western powers. In 1927, the nationalists once again joined a government coalition, but this time under Stresemann's terms. He demanded the full commitment to a line of international accommodation, the acceptance of the Locarno treaties, and cooperation with the League of Nations. Until the coalition's breakup 1.5 years later, Stresemann faced no serious opposition from the nationalists. We have now taken a detailed look at Stresemann's strategies towards the West. Now it's time to look at his Polish policy, which is generally considered to be his greatest shortcoming. Stresemann never showed any willingness to accept the new borders in the east. To the German public, the so-called Polish theft of Prussia's eastern provinces was an outrageous injustice, and virtually all German parties, including the Social Democrats and the Liberals, demanded the return of those lands. This can, partially be explained by the fact that in the decades before the First World War, the Poles in Prussia were usually seen as second-class citizens, discriminated against, subjected to Germanization measures at school and elsewhere, while nationalist organizations such as the German Eastern Marches Society constantly fostering the idea that the Germans were somehow a superior race tasked with civilizing the Wild East. The fact that a newly created Polish state was one of the main beneficiaries of the Treaty of Versailles and now ruled over former Prussian land was simply incomprehensible to many. When the Polish state itself began to impose discriminatory legislations against the small number of Germans in the country, the fate of that German minority became a hotly debated topic. During the Weimar Republic, the anti-Polish sentiment remained strong in the public mind, and countless nationalist organizations called for a revision of the eastern borders. In response, the Republican parties tried to take the wind out of the sails of these reactionary groups by insisting on a hard line against Poland themselves. In such an atmosphere, the recognition of the eastern borders would have been a political suicide. While Stresemann certainly had no intentions of retaking those lands by force, he also made it very clear that a Polish Locarno or any sort of accommodation was out of the question. His strategy was to create a friendly atmosphere with the other European powers and to isolate Poland. Eventually, an opportunity might arise in which the question of the borders could be settled diplomatically. Because of the improved relations with Germany, France slowly began to distance itself from its Polish ally. Britain also showed no willingness to guarantee the new Versailles borders in the east. In a rather dramatic statement, Austen Chamberlain proclaimed that no British government would ever risk the bones of a British grenadier for the Polish corridor. With French tolerance, British lack of interest, and Soviet support, Stresemann hoped that an increasingly weak and isolated Poland might cave in to German territorial demands. The problem with this approach was that it was based on wishful thinking. While he was usually known for his realistic outlooks on the world and reasonable arguments, he based his entire strategy towards Poland on faraway developments in the future that would somehow allow Germany to regain its lands. He and a lot of other revisionists placed their hopes in a future collapse of the Polish economy. It was this sort of thinking which led to the German government declaring a trade war on Poland in 1925 by raising the tariffs on the import of Polish coal. As the Polish economy depended on exports to Germany, the złoty tanked, strikes broke out, and tensions between the Polish socialists and the National Democrats reached a boiling point. When the Bank of England asked if Germany was willing to support an international campaign to support the złoty, Stresemann wrote a letter to the German ambassador in London, urging him to exercise caution. He argued that it would be desirable to postpone the final and permanent consolidation of Poland until the country is ready for a settlement of the border issue in accordance with our wishes and until our political power has been sufficiently strengthened. Stresemann's hopes for the complete collapse of the Polish state evaporated when Józef Piłsudski took over power in May 1926, established his authoritarian regime and stabilized the economy. By refusing to come to any sort of agreement with Poland, Stresemann made sure that German-Polish relations wouldn't normalize in the 1920s. The ideal of a complete restoration of the former empire's borders remained present in the German public mind, and even the smallest compromise was declined on the grounds of baseless hopes for the future. As the British diplomat Bruce Lockhart put it, the German Republic suffers from the stalling of hopes. Even if it can be argued that Stresemann's hands were sort of tied when it came to the question of the Polish border due to the domestic political situation, it's still a massive shame that his time as foreign minister saw absolutely no improvements in the relations between Germany and Poland. A man of his caliber should have done better. By 1928, Stresemann had gotten seriously ill. He had been suffering from a bad physical condition since his younger years, and due to the immense amount of stress and pressure that he was subjected to in his years as foreign minister, he eventually collapsed in 1928 and never made a full recovery. But even as a doomed man, he kept on going, kept his party together, and achieved two more remarkable successes in foreign policy. Stresemann wanted to gain further sympathy from the United States by pressuring the cabinet to agree to joining the Kellogg-Briand Pact. This agreement, which was put in motion by Aristide Briand and the American Foreign Minister Frank Billings Kellogg, obliged the signature states to renounce war as a viable instrument of national policy, no matter the background. This was a huge step from the previous decades where any country's right to wage a war was never questioned by the international community. By joining the pact, Stresemann hoped to make the French occupation of the Rhineland appear like a barrier to world peace, and to show the world that Germany only had peaceful intentions in mind. The treaty was signed in Paris on the 27th of August 1928 by 15 different states, among them Germany, the US, France, Britain, Italy, Japan and Poland. Article 1 of the treaty stated, "The high contracting parties solemnly declare in the name of their respective peoples that they condemn recourse to war for the solution of international controversies, and renounce it as an instrument of national policy in their relations with one another." As we all know, the treaty unfortunately failed to prevent the Second World War, just 1 decade later, but Stresemann wouldn't live long enough to experience that, and the fact that Germany even signed such a declaration after being considered a pariah state for so long is simply extraordinary. Stresemann's last major success was the Young Plan. To summarize, the Young Plan finalized the topic of German reparations under the leadership of the American banker Owen Young. The plan set the total amount of reparations to 112 billion marks, which should be paid in yearly installments of 2 billion marks until 1988, with the annual amount declining over time. The German railways and banks were once again nationalized, and Stresemann managed to convince the Allies to withdraw from the Rhineland 5 years early. Stresemann's work as foreign minister was nothing short of amazing. When he took office in 1923, Germany was ruined, humiliated and no longer relevant on the world stage. By October 1929, that had changed. Stresemann had managed to revise the most painful obligations of the Versailles Treaty. The question of the war reparations was settled in a way that was bearable for the German economy, the Rhineland was liberated, Germany was recognized by Britain, France and the US to be a great power, and the country was allowed to join the League of Nations in order to defend its interests more vocally. All of this was achieved with a sensible and realistic approach, and by warming up to the Western Allies. Only a man like Stresemann could have achieved all of this in such a short period of time. Gustav Stresemann died on the 3rd of October 1929, at the age of only 51 from 2 strokes and a heart attack. With that, Germany lost the most talented diplomat since the days of Otto von Bismarck. Hundreds of thousands of people accompanied him on his last procession through Berlin, and many more mourned the loss of the man whose work had done so much to bring stability to the new German Republic. He wasn't just successful as a foreign minister, but also as a politician who kept the German People's Party loyal to the principles of democracy. Through his persuasiveness and his commitment to the cause, he held the so-called Grand Coalition consisting of the Social Democrats, the German Democratic Party, the Centre Party, the Bavarian People's Party, and the German People's Party under the chancellorship of Hermann Müller together. Just 6 months after Stresemann's death, the Grand Coalition collapsed over arguments about the contribution rate for unemployment insurance. Should the workers or the employers pay 0.5% more? The Social Democrats and the German People's Party couldn't agree, and so the last parliamentary coalition of the Weimar Republic collapsed. In the early Reichstag elections of 1930, the NSDAP gained its best result yet. Could Stresemann have kept this coalition together even after the years of the world financial crash and thus have changed the course of history? Probably, but we'll never know for sure. If there was one man who could have done it, it would definitely have been Stresemann. Ever since Stresemann's death, there have been speculations on whether his change of heart to a pro-Republican politician who was willing to compromise in order to create peace in Europe was genuine, or whether deep down he forever remained an imperialist annexationist. One indication for the latter was an infamous letter which Stresemann wrote to Crown Prince Wilhelm in 1925, shortly before the Locarno Conference. In it, he explained how he wanted to revise the Treaty of Versailles by evading the big questions until Germany had the chance to recover. He also used the word finanzieren, which is a term used to describe the process of using tricks in order to gain something. The revelation of this letter, in the 1930s, caused a huge outrage in France, and the enemies of Aristide Briand accused him of being too naive and for falling into the trap of the double-faced German diplomat. After Stresemann's personal archives were made public, historians were deeply divided on how to evaluate Stresemann's policies in light of his old monarchist nationalist days. To this day, there still doesn't seem to be a common consensus. But truth be told, it doesn't really matter. Even if he remained a lifelong revisionist and nationalist at heart, which might certainly be the case, what's really important are the things he actually did. He pursued his goals in a peaceful and diplomatic way. All of his achievements served the prevention of war. He built up cordial relations with the former arch-nemesis France and made sure that the two countries got along in the future. Largely due to him, the young Weimar Republic experienced its most prosperous and stable years. Stresemann serves as one of the best examples to demonstrate just how far understanding, pragmatism, and the willingness to cooperate can get you. His untimely death was certainly an unbelievable tragedy, and on that fateful day, in 1929, Germany definitely lost one of its greatest personalities of all time. Alright, dankeschön for watching the video. Hopefully you enjoyed this little biography of Gustav Stresemann. I've thought of making more videos like this one, where the centre of attention is just put on one single person, and I have some ideas for future videos, but please do let me know what you think of that. As always, a special and massive thank you goes out to my invaluable supporters on Ko-Fi: A Cup of Tea, Tristan Kriegsmann, Ryan Layton, Philipp Marchewka, Marius Gerling, the Grand Duke of Sealand, Luca Drohle, Wienweh, Pseudoriser, Lal Furphy, and Yin. You are just phenomenal. Have a very wonderful day, and see you next time.